It's the 90th Annual Academy Awards, and Stella and I have watched all the nominated films. Pretty much. We'll get back to that one here. On this episode, you're going to find out which films we didn't see. We're going to also talk about all those that have been honored by the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts, and Sciences in this special 9-part series. In the end, it really comes down to the stories, right? We're going to talk about the best animated, foreign language, documentary, and overall film, including the 4 that we haven't seen, like we talked about. Hey, Stella, what's up?
Hi.
She's scrolling through her phone. It's very good entertainment. So let's start off with the animated films. A couple of these are actually on Netflix right now if you have not seen them. So let's start off. The Boss Baby. It's Tom McGrath and Ramsey and Nato. It's their first nomination. What did you think of The Boss Baby, Stella?
It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but the trailers gave me everything I actually needed to know about it. It had more heart than I was giving it credit for.
I think, for me, The Boss Baby was made for people under the age of 10.
I don't know. I know people who liked it. I know a person that liked it a lot.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
It
but
just
she
seemed like
also
a
has
fever dream to me.
She also kind of has terrible taste in movies.
There is one funny joke for adults. It's in the first 2 minutes of the movie.
I guess not terrible taste. She likes good movies too, but it's just unreliable taste in music. How about that?
Music, good.
Movies.
It's good to know that we're talking about music.
Movies. I'm trying to find the Oscar odds. Okay.
Okay. Well,
that I don't need.
Yeah, Boss Baby. I think that was the big thing when the nominations came out. It was, and you will need them. It was really, that was the one everybody made fun of being nominated for Best Animated Picture. So it is certainly the weakest out of not only this category, but I think of all categories across the board. Boss Baby is the weakest nominated film.
There's Traffic Stop.
Yeah, but Traffic Stop on paper looks good. Yeah, on paper, the Boss Baby doesn't even make a lot of sense. I'd rather watch a Baby Driver than a Boss Baby. So the other nominations, let's see, we've got The Breadwinner. That's Nora Twomey and Anthony Leo. It's their first nomination. I really like The Breadwinner. I thought it was almost as good as Coco, which is the next nomination.
I liked The Breadwinner. I liked the art style, and I like that it was from a different culture than I'm used to seeing. I'm used to seeing cultures like Coco. I'm used to seeing cultures like Boss Baby, but I don't get to see a culture that's really coming out and flourishing here, for better or worse.
Right. It's for a fan of Khalid Hosseini, who did The Kite Runner and Thousand Splendid Suns. It's it really fits in with that. That takes place in the same town as The Kite Runner.
Does it?
Yeah. Yep. They're both Afghanistan around the time that the Taliban.
Afghanistan's not a town.
It's I can't think of the town right now, but it's the same town, and with the Taliban.
It's not Syria? It's not Aleppo.
No, that's a different. It's a different country and a different city. Yes.
You're welcome.
It's not Syria.
At least I didn't call it a town.
Yeah. But yeah, I love the animation style. I thought it was gorgeous. I like that it was scary enough. It had blood. It had
Oh yeah, that's the thing that I like about more of the kind of family oriented or more adult oriented, is that it's not afraid to show real life situations. A lot of older or Disney-esque movies are kind of shy away from it, for at least for a long time when I was growing up. Whereas now I'm able to appreciate it, and I think that violence for kids shouldn't necessarily be shied away from when it's properly done.
Right. I think they did make an effort to make it a little less scary for kids. This is one, Boss Baby's for 10 and below. This is really for 10 and up. Maybe even a little older than that. But when they're asking the boys to make tea for them, just knowing the history of that region and some of the things with the Taliban, I know that tea boys are used at night for other purposes sometimes. So that had
They're used for teaing.
well, yeah, they're called the Chai Boys, and it's kind of like a child bride. The soldiers would use them for their pleasure at night, and so that has an extra implication for adults that know that, but it's not there for kids. It's not. They're scary because
Unless you knew about it, right?
right. They're grabbing by the wrists and telling them to come make them tea, and that's
Being
scary.
violent and
Right.
yeah.
But it's so yeah, it's definitely it's an honest depiction, and yet it has this fantasy kind of woven into it, and it's kind of like The Big Fish or
Which is not an animated movie.
no, but in the regards that it's talking about how important storytelling is. Um,
I'm sure there's other animated films and features that talk about that too.
there's a lot of them. Yeah, I mean the Life of Pi is another one.
Not animated.
No, I'm not.
That's my point.
It doesn't have to be animated. I'm just saying
that. I was trying
it's
to
got
find
that
a
theme,
reference.
and I like that theme. Those are some of my favorite movies. Have that theme. So, Coco, Lee Unkrich, Darla K. Anderson. It's Unkrich's third nomination. He has one win. Anderson, well, two now. Anderson has 3 nominations, 1 win now, 2. Also nominated, of course, for Best Song, which we now know has won. Remember Me. We have seen the show now. It was on yesterday. We're recording this and the next 2 episodes after the broadcast. Coco, what can be said about Coco?
I want to plant marigolds.
Okay, you don't want a white guitar?
No, I have guitars. I can get guitars aplenty, and I've had a guitar, so I don't necessarily need that. I would love marigolds.
Sales for guitars made in that town, because it's a real town, have gone through the roof, especially white guitars.
Well, they're backdated. Yeah, you can't get one. You'd get one in like a year from now. But yeah.
Right. I think it's interesting that Pixar has kind of started to grab cultures, and they do it different than Disney did.
Hey, Mulan was amazing.
Okay. All right. It was after I was an adult, and I didn't really care for Mulan that much.
Of course you didn't. Why are we dating?
We could talk more about that in another episode, but I like that they're doing these cultural stories, and they're having people from the culture do that instead of, even Moana was 2 white guys. It was 2 old white guys, but they brought in Lin-Manuel Miranda and The Rock and a bunch of other people to help them. They went to the islands and learned about the culture. It wasn't just going to be a Hawaii picture.
It was small islands.
Right. South Pacific is kind of what it's like if it's just a white view of that culture, and this is bringing in people from the culture to enhance the story and make it better.
To all the people that were mad about it getting whitewashed, your Chinese food is whitewashed.
Yeah, like Mulan. So that's Coco.
Szechuan sauce.
Ferdinand by Carlos Saldana, another cultural story. It takes place in Spain, though. Carlos has had 2 nominations. Ferdinand has a stellar cast, led by John Cena, Kate McKinnon. Just a great cast all around, all the way through. And the characters are very interesting, but there's so many of them that it would have been a better miniseries. And I think the story wasn't strong enough. And it's not because Ferdinand, the story itself, isn't strong enough. It's because they didn't know how to elongate it properly, to me. Because I think it had decent fillers, but it wasn't necessarily filled in correctly, or at least edited the right way. Yeah, it's an interesting story, but it's very short.
Right.
And so they just threw a bunch of characters into it and character moments, but they
made them too good. They didn't make them wallflowery enough for you to pass it and be like, oh, he's interesting, and then let go. No, you find these characters and you're like, but I want to know more about that one. What is he looking forward to at the end of the movie? Like, what makes him happy?
I think you spend enough time with some of the characters, like the bulls. Clearly, you spend enough time with them. But yeah, I mean, the sheepdog or even the goat, which is a big character. It's just there's so many things going on. The hedgehogs, the horses, which I love the horses.
Oh, the German horses.
Yeah, I liked Gabriel Iglesias, watching him be animated as a hedgehog. That was fun. You know, the I love cake and all that. It's a fun movie for the family. It's again, it's a weaker one compared to Coco
Or the
or
breadwinner.
The Breadwinner, or our next nomination, which is Loving Vincent, which is Dorada Kobiala, Hugh Welchman, and Ivan McTaggart. For Kobiala, first nomination. Welchman, 2 nominations, 1 win. And McTaggart, this is the first nomination. This movie was very impressive, just the way it was made. It does tell an interesting story, and if you don't know much about Vincent van Gogh, then you should watch it. But it's 65,000 frames of all oil paintings on canvas, created by a team of 100 painters. They're all using the Van Gogh techniques. Or if you're an American, usually you know him as Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh. But Vincent van Gogh is how you actually pronounce his name. He's Dutch. And after reusing certain paintings, because they would paint over it, so they don't have to repaint the background every time, the film resulted in 853 different paintings or shots. I actually want one of those really badly.
I would like to have one. I mean, and I don't mean one as in just like some random one where it's just a bunch of blue and yellow and you don't know necessarily what it is. But I think the film was beautifully done. It captures your eye. The only smidge I can see with it is that it can be kind of hard to follow all the movements and really get the performance through, I suppose.
Well, it uses the rotoscope technique, which a lot of people know. People my age know it from the Hobbit cartoon. It's been used in several things. What was the movie that was cel shaded with Keanu Reeves? I don't remember what it was called.
Oh, I wanted to watch that. I didn't get to.
But it used rotoscope.
But even then, that wasn't still. Even for my people, my age of people.
Yeah, it's not a technique that's used a lot. Although in video games they use it all the time, kind of.
Borderlands?
It's a digital rotoscoping.
Can you explain that?
So rotoscoping, basically they record the performance film and then they paint over it. They paint each frame. And I don't think they painted over it in this instance because they're using canvas. But they painted each frame individually, the sort of a photographic recreation, but in the style of Vincent van Gogh, which was really cool. I liked seeing a couple of characters that you recognized, like Saoirse Ronan is in it, of course, Lady Bird. We also had O'Dowd, who's in it. I can't remember his first name.
We also had not the Hound. What's his name? Bronn from Game of Thrones.
Oh, was he in that? I didn't recognize him.
Yeah, he was.
I'm gonna pull up Loving Vincent.
Finding Vincent. Is this the sequel Vincent. To Finding Nemo?
It's really it's a story about his mysterious passing.
From a gunshot wound to the gut.
Yeah, suicide by gut shot.
That's
Chris O'Dowd, who played the postman, and it's neat especially if you're familiar with his work, because you can see his work being translated into the film, and it's cool because they show a lot of that in the end credits. So not even if you're not familiar with it, you'll see where a lot of those shots came from.
They do reference the original painting versus the actor versus how they painted it. So
right, and since it takes place in the same locations as where he did a lot of his work, then it also has the excuse of, okay, well, that's what inspired it. Like Saoirse Ronan's character may not be the woman playing the piano,
but we'll have her do that.
But yeah, we're gonna have her be the woman playing the piano.
The process of the story, so that it works and that we can flow through his different artwork.
Right.
But it's good. I really liked it. I think it's wonderful to have a animated film that is more for adults.
Yeah,
because you can't really keep children watching this. It'd be beautiful, and if a child is interested in it, heck yeah. But it's not typically an adult thing, even though it's not really mature ideals.
Well, it's almost like an art class experiment that's really good. You know, like a lot of people like, oh, we're gonna do a stop go of me shaving, and it's just,
so it's like if you went to a high class art university and this was like your doctorate.
Yeah, like this is your art project, and this was a big project for
lots of students. They did actually have lots of student
artists. Yeah, it was mainly a project for. I think it was a bunch of different museums worked together, like the Vincent van Gogh Museum and stuff like that. So Out of those 5 movies, Stella, we know that Coco won. Are you happy that Coco won? Do you
Oh, of
believe it
course.
deserved it?
Yeah, I do. I genuinely do. I do think Coco was the most well-rounded. I think
Mm-hmm.
it had all the strong suits. It hits all the notes. The other movies were strong in their respective way, except for probably Boss Baby. Um, and they didn't necessarily strike all the right tones. Ferdinand was probably the closest, besides Loving Vincent. They're just both on
Well,
either.
no, the breadwinner was.
Well, Breadwinner is of course number 2, but I'm saying that as far as clear near perfect like Coco is, you have Ferdinand and Loving Vincent on either side of it, where it's too far to one versus being in the middle like Breadwinner and Coco.
Yeah, I really loved Breadwinner, and I still tell people it's almost as good as Coco. You should watch it. It's almost as good as Coco. And of course, Coco.
It's also on Netflix.
It is on Netflix, and of course, and Loving Vincent is available on Amazon. I think most of these are available on Amazon. But
They're
going
gonna
to
be everything that you have, everything that has been on the Oscars will be available on Amazon at some point in time.
Yes, so the Vegas odds were clearly in favor of Coco, and Coco won. I think the Vegas odds were pretty spot on all the way across. Actually.
Honestly, from what I can tell, yes. There was only like 2 instances where it deviated away, and that's because Vegas odds last second chose a different Best Picture.
Did they really?
Yeah, don't you remember? You looked at me, said, when did that pull ahead?
Oh, interesting.
But I can't pull up the Vegas odds. They are down since the betting is over.
Oh, well, here is the category where we only saw 2 of the films. Foreign language film.
It's because they're impossible to get.
Yeah, they're just really difficult to find.
Unless you're in LA.
2 of the 2 that we watched are actually pretty easy to get. On Body and Soul is on Netflix, and The Square is actually on Hulu, even though we rented it on Amazon right before it went on Hulu.
That's because The Square went on right on Saturday, the Saturday before.
Yeah, which was good that we watched it beforehand. But okay, so A Fantastic Woman is the first nominated film. It is the one that won. It's Chile, and it's Sebastian Lelio was the director. It's I'm gonna try to pronounce all of the original names for these 2, which is easy only for The Square because it's actually called The Square. Una Mujer Fantástica, which I think that's probably pretty good for The Fantastic Woman. It's described as Marina, a transgender woman who works as a waitress and moonlights as a nightclub singer, is bowled over by the death of her older boyfriend. And yeah, I haven't seen it. Can't say a whole lot about it. It looks cool in the trailers. It's
She's so intimidating though. Her face, it's kind of like looking at Frances McDormand's face when she just stares you down. She has the same way, at least in all the the trailers.
Frances McDormand is a good.
But no, my point is that she stares you down, and
Sure.
in the trailer she stares you down too, where you're looking at her, and then she looks at you, and even though she might have a smile on her face, her eyes are so deeply intense that you're just like, oh my.
Well, I think part of it's because she's tall and broad-shouldered. I mean,
sure.
It's a transgender woman. She has a little bit of a body like a man in some ways, but it's interesting because I read one review that they didn't know that they fell in love with her and had no idea that it was a transgender woman.
Fun.
Which is interesting. They didn't have a problem knowing afterwards that she was,
not.
But yeah, so it's a pretty compelling story, and I guess the whole transgender aspect of it is secondary to the story, which I think is really important. Moving in that direction, We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more with the Best Picture nominees, I think. But so that one that had the Vegas odds all the way across. The Insult, which was Russia's film L'Insulte. I made it sound all French, but it's Russian, so it's more like L'Insulte or something. It's Andrei Zajinstvy.
You're a failure.
Savinsky. Sure. Andrei Savinsky. Probably.
Where am I?
Right?
The Insult. Andrei.
You took a little Russian in college.
Yeah, and this is tiny as shit. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Hold on, I need to.
You're not making fun of me as much anymore.
Well, no, because the red line is
Yeah, it also is spelled incorrectly according to Word.
Ignore all. Ow.
Andre.
Zivin Jinstiv?
Give that back. You're no better than me. Give it to me. Even with your Russian training.
I can't remember.
So,
that was like 4 years ago, man.
And actually, I think, you know what, I got these mixed up. Because this is the information. Sometimes on the sites that I went to, it was backwards.
Back-assward?
Yeah, the Russian film is not the insult. This was the Lebanese film. So this would have been Ziav Dure. And it's the insult. And it's described as after an emotional exchange between a Lebanese Christian and a Palestinian refugee escalates, the men end up in a court case that gets national attention. And again, we haven't seen any of this film, so it's difficult for us to comment on it. It looked cool in the trailers, very intense. It's nice to see Lebanon getting attention because it's not very often that Lebanese films get that much attention.
Or are positively
recognized,
brought about.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, not a whole lot we can say about it without having seen it. Loveless, which is the Russian film. This would be Andrei Savinsky. And this is a couple going through a divorce. Must team up to find their son who has disappeared during one of their bitter arguments. And this actually was the one that I wanted to watch the most out of the foreign language films and didn't get to see.
Personal to you?
Well, it's just interesting. It's it's a missing child, and you've got these parents that are separated that are looking for this child together. It seemed like a kind of an interesting way to do a thriller. I don't know if it's a thriller. That's just my guess based on the description. It's a Eastern European film, so it's probably not a specific genre.
Could be.
But yeah, I'm disappointed I didn't get to see it. I'm hoping to see it at some point. And it did look good. So here are the two that we did see on Body and Soul.
Gnarly.
Testrol S. Lelekro. This is a Hungarian film by Ildiko Envedi. When slaughterhouse workers Andre and Maria discover they share the same dreams, where they meet in a forest as a deer and fall in love, they decide to make their dreams come true, but it's difficult in real life.
Did you just say as a deer?
As deer. As deer, yeah. Okay. And it's interesting. It just the performance. It's about somebody who's, I believe she's supposed to be autistic.
Yes, severely autistic.
To the point where she's still getting counseling from her childhood counselor because she
needs guidance still.
She doesn't want to speak to an adult counselor.
It's comfort. I get that.
She's kind of she's very mathematically minded, but not emotionally minded at all. And she practices conversations with toys before she has them in real life. She relives conversations with them as well.
Right, and she does what most people do, whereas she's trying to predict something that's happening. Like, she's going to play out this scenario, and this is how it'll go, and this is how I'll answer. And then, of course, just like the rest of us, it never goes that way.
Right, and she's thrown completely and can't even continue the conversation.
She can't. And that's the thing. It's the difference is that she can't rebound. She can't make up a new response. Her pre-planned responses are no longer valid.
And Andre had some kind of accident where he lost the use of his arm, and it's made him disconnected from other people as well. And then, of course, the other people at the slaughterhouse that they work with are all interesting characters.
Well, they're all their own people. I think that's
and it has some really funny comedic moments. But it's not a comedy. It's romance for sure.
It's a gnarly romance.
Yeah, it's got some pretty gruesome, because it's about body and soul. So the bodies, what are they used for? How are they looked at? And they work at a slaughterhouse, so you can just imagine how they metaphorically show what a body is.
Sure, but let's be clear. The slaughtering really only happens to cows. Because when you told me this the first time, you made it sound like someone was going to die, and then no one died. Well,
that's a spoiler. It is pretty brutal, though. There is violence against people and human bodies in the last part of the film. And, without giving anything away, Stella. I would recommend it. I thought it was a good love story. And
I wasn't even thinking about that. I thought, no, I'm just like, nobody.
Okay, all right. Yeah, no more spoilers. Okay, The Square, which is known as The Square. It's a Swedish film, which makes me happy. I work at IKEA, um, so it's nice
You're
to see
also
a
this
Swedish film.
giant blonde white guy.
I don't know if I have any Swedish, but people think I do all the time. Ruben Östlund, it's a prestigious Stockholm Museum's chief art curator, finds himself in times of both professional and personal crisis as he attempts to set up a controversial new exhibit. And this is like kind of it's a European film, so bear with
European
me.
in my boots.
But it kind of reminds me of the old Tom Hanks movies in the middle. He went from doing hardcore comedies to doing
Turner and
movies
Hooch.
that were very comedic in the beginning and got very serious at the end, to doing drama, basically, where it might have some funny things.
Suburbs.
So like Big is very funny for the first half, and then it's very serious for the last half. Yeah, Turner and Hooch is another one. There's a few films like that. Joe versus the Volcano.
The Burbs wasn't one?
No, The Burbs is pretty funny all the way across.
So that's the beginning.
It's in the same. Well, it'd fall in like The Money Pit, but The Burbs, yeah, it would fall in the earlier Tom Hanks movies, even though I think it was a little later in his career. But it's really a film about communication and how it's. And we would talk about it in the States as a First Amendment movie. It's about freedom of speech,
expression,
and about how there are consequences to what you say, and sometimes people don't understand or interpret what you're trying to say clearly. Sometimes you have no control over what you're saying,
or the lack of dedication and personal accountability.
Yeah, and at what point, and this is interesting, at what point do people save each other from dangerous speech? At what point is it your responsibility to save someone from that? Which is interesting, and because Sweden's dealing with an issue now with growing, if you publish a cartoon of Muhammad, then you could be murdered.
Or even say specific phrases, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and so Sweden's dealing with that, and it seems like this is sort of a it had nothing to do with that, but it seems to be from the same thought process.
It could also be for the communication barrier, where you have two different cultures that communicate very differently. In the sense that you have a culture that can talk very aggressively and a different culture that's very polite and very respectful.
Sure.
And then you have the sense of you're trying to just communicate. Both of you are in a good mood. Both of you are being genial. But because of one way of talking and you're talking just like normal, someone takes it the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed The Square, and I feel like the main actor is going to have a huge career here in the United States.
Or at least he'll transition here well.
Yeah, he speaks perfect English. His name is Klaus Bang.
Now I know what movies he's going to be in.
I think that's how you pronounce it. And Elizabeth Moss is an American that's in the film as well. But I think he's going to be a huge star. He's so captivating to watch.
Huge star, huh?
He is. So we only saw 2 of the 3 films that were nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, and out of those 5, I still knew Fantastic Woman was going to win based on the subject matter and the reviews that it was getting. It was the favorite Vegas odds. But out of the 2 that I watched, I would recommend them not to just anybody, because if you don't like foreign films, then you're not going to like them if you don't like to read.
Or even if you can't critically think throughout a movie, because that was my problem. I typically like to watch movies twice, because the first time I like to enjoy the movie for the movie and have the story be told to me the way the director, the writer, and the artists wanted me to see it. The second time I'm going to think critically on it, because then I'll actually analyze it, I'll see what the director and the editors wanted me to see and all that jazz.
And I only watch films once, pretty much. I forgot to say Loveless's name in Russian. It's Nelvubov. It's so I'd like to see the Russian film. Speaking of Russians, we're going to get into in documentaries. This is another category where we got to see 4 of the films and not one of them, because It's actually made in another country. It's made in France, and it wasn't available.
It was really limited release.
Very limited release. It was still in theaters. That was what it told us. But the theaters that it was like in one theater in Texas, I think.
No, there was one in L.A., but it's like at 2 p.m. on a weekday. Like, how are you going to get to that?
Yeah, in Beverly Hills or something like that. Yeah. So we'll get to that one here in a second. Documentary Abacus Small Enough to Jail is on Netflix. It's a Netflix original. Mark Mitten, Julie Goldman, and Steve James. It's the first nomination for Mitten, and the second nominations for Goldman and James. It's a small financial institution called Abacus becomes the only company criminally indicted in the wake of the United States 2008 mortgage crisis. It's like a little bank in Chinatown, and
Which Chinatown?
I don't know actually.
New York.
I think it was New York's Chinatown.
Because they had the bull on there, so I'm pretty sure it's New York.
The filmmakers and the subjects of the films go into great length about how they want to be like Jimmy Stewart, George Bailey, and
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life with the Bailey Savings and Loan, and they're giving loans to people that other banks would turn away, which is, how
Good
they
and
got
bad.
caught up in this whole thing. It's the only bank, of course, that was prosecuted in any way, shape, or form.
Get those minorities.
Well, that's the kind of the point that the film's trying to make, but I didn't feel like it made a very good case. They show a lot. They're very honest about the corruption that's happening in the bank, and then they are very quick to say, yeah, but it's not the management's fault, right?
Right. I do think they were a little too defensive in that sense. I do think they should have been able to take some responsibility for it because they are management, and I get that they have a lot to do and they're very busy, but you still have to have a checks and balances, and obviously it wasn't there.
Right. If everybody's stealing from your store and you don't do anything to
Or know
fire
about
those
it?
people or even know about it, then there's something wrong with the management.
Mm.
And I don't think that they were complicit in the theft that was happening or in the corruption that was happening, but they're responsible for it still.
Right, and that's what they're trying to say is that they're not responsible for it
Right,
because
their
they
hands are
didn't
clean.
do it,
They're innocent people.
but they are. It always travels up. Shit travels up when it's like that.
So it's difficult to say that the film did a great job of presenting it as they are being
Fair and balanced.
They're being persecuted.
Right.
Because of their race, which is kind of the point that they're making.
Well, it's that, but I also think they're being got after because they're small.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it is that they're small, so they're an easy target. Where you got these white collar guys that are doing worse things that didn't get any kind of criminal charges
Litigation
against
on them because they're like billionaires.
And so that's where I think they should have focused the film more. And I just don't think that they have the subject that they have. It's not like Traffic Stop where you can pick other instances.
Yeah.
There's one bank. And I just don't feel like they made a great case for how innocent that bank was.
I think they did, but I think they got sidetracked. I think they were on track going somewhere, and then it just got skewered to the left.
Right. So then you have our German Faces Places, which is the French film that we didn't get to see. It's Agnes Varda, its first nomination, but she won an honorary award this year for directing. Rosalie Varda, its first nomination, and J.R. the artist himself, first nomination. It's called Villages. Director Agnes Varda and photographer muralist J.R. journey through rural France and form an unlikely friendship. Now the trailer for this is great, where they go through and basically set up a photo booth in the town, and then they print these gigantic pictures of these townspeople and make
So when you say
art
gigantic,
pieces.
you mean that they fit on the side of buses and on a
buildings.
complete side of a 2-story building.
Right, and so it's really like these moving art pieces for small villages with the faces of the people from the town. But again, we didn't get to see it. It looked like it was very inspirational, but we didn't see it. Can't say a lot about it. And then Icarus, which of course won Best Documentary this year. Brian Fogel, first nomination. Dan Coogan, first nomination. When Brian Fogel sets out to uncover the truth about doping in sports, a chance meeting with a Russian scientist transforms his story from a personal experiment into a geopolitical thriller involving dirty urine, unexplained death, and Olympic gold, exposing the biggest scandal in sports history. And this was my favorite out of all of them. The way it was told was fresh and unique. I love that it starts off as Super Size Me, where he's just going to get doped and see how he does. He's a bicyclist and he wants to compete in the Tour de France. And so the movie starts off with, I'm going to get doped and we've got to find somebody that will work with me on this. And of course, everybody recommends this Russian scientist who runs the lab in Russia. And then he's the guy, and it turns out that he is the guy, and it turns into Citizen One.
He's the guy in the underground, but then it turns into the guy as in he meddled with a lot of the Olympic stuff.
Right. Well, he's basically Edward Snowden.
Right.
And
well,
so the movie turns into Citizen One, and it's all about the whistleblower for, of course, the Russian doping scandal that happened in real life. Of course, it's a documentary, and it is the biggest scandal in all of sports history. So I love that. And this guy, I'm telling you, if you want to see what big films are going to be coming out, maybe they're not even big films, but what movies are going to come out, watch documentaries.
Like The Big Short?
Well, anything. You can watch the documentaries, and then a couple years later, it's going to be a picture. Like, when they came out with the World Trade Center Type-Ropist, and I'd already seen it on a documentary. Netflix came out with a documentary about National Lampoon, and then they came out with a movie about National Lampoon. There's a lot of examples like that. Yeah, The Big Short's another one where there were a lot of documentaries about that subject matter. I really feel like this is going to be another one of those movies, and mark my words, I might be wrong here, but I believe that Robert Downey Jr. will be playing our Russian scientist because he's such a colorful, interesting, funny character. And he looks like Robert Downey Jr. with a droopy eye, salt and pepper hair, and a goatee.
And the personality is so wonderful.
Yeah, he was really the reason I love the movie.
He's so likable.
Yeah, it's
and
such a great movie.
You cheer for him right off the bat, even though you know that these bad things are going on. As soon as he tells you this is why I'm doing it, you kind of just instantly believe him because you want to like him.
Right. Yeah, and I would recommend anyone to watch this one. It's a Netflix original again, Icarus. Check it out on Netflix.
Dang it, Netflix! Stop invading everything, man.
Last Men in Aleppo. Where do we watch this one?
Netflix
as well. Okay, so this one, if you saw the White Helmets a couple of years ago, this is like the sequel.
Sad.
It's a full-length version of it. Faraz Faryad is first nomination, Sorenstein Jespersen first nomination, and Kareem Abid first nomination. It's known as the Sidst Mind-i Aleppo, The Last Men in Aleppo. Khalid, Mohammed, and Subi volunteered at the White Helmets trying to save lives of hundreds of victims at besieged city during the Syrian civil war. So these are just regular guys that kind of become like volunteer firemen, where they're digging people out of the wreckage of buildings. And it's interesting, it starts with one of these guys watching himself in the White Helmets with his children. The short documentary
from a while ago.
and they're saying, "Daddy, you, that's you." Yeah, that's me. And then you follow these guys through that, and the crisis is even worse than it was at that time, and it was really dire back then.
Well, it was. I can't even say more chaotic because it's still chaotic, but now it seems much more bleak.
And this was an interesting film because a lot of the filmmakers had to hand over the cameras to the White Helmets because they themselves couldn't enter there to film. They weren't allowed.
Interesting fact.
Mm-hmm.
Only one of the filmmakers made it here for the Oscars.
Oh.
Out of the 5.
Oh, yeah. They weren't granted.
Were not granted visas to come here. Fucking filmmakers to go and attend the Oscars can't even get here.
So this is, it was probably Jespersen, if I had to look at the names and guess.
Oh, yeah, be that TSA agent that just flew you right by? Sure.
So that was The Last Man in Aleppo. It is a very sad movie.
It's heartbreaking because
there's some distance between you and the characters, the people.
But I think for me personally, when I was watching it, I kept hoping for that ray of sunshine. The whole time I'm waiting for it. Like, there has to be
There's some hope.
Well, yeah, but there has to be one, and then the thing progresses, and I don't feel relieved.
Well, I liked Muhammad, and his relationship with his brother. I thought that was a really
That was beautiful.
compelling part of the story. So, Last Minute in Aleppo, check it out, Netflix. Strong Island is an HBO original. I
thought
believe
we saw that on Netflix.
Maybe it is Netflix. Oh, it is
we
another
saw
Netflix.
Everything
That's right.
on Netflix, except for Faces, Places, and
when we say Netflix original, it means that Netflix basically saw it at a film festival and bought it, and Netflix basically owns the monopoly on documentaries. We'll touch on that in a later episode, actually.
And a different series.
No, a later episode, actually. So this is an interesting history-making film because Yance Ford, who is the subject and the filmmaker, the director, is the first transgender person to get nominated for an Oscar. First nomination for Yance Ford, and then Jocelyn Barnes, first nomination as well. Yance Ford is the first transgender nominee in Oscar history. So this basically follows Yance talking about the death of her brother, or his brother. Although I was confused because Yance speaks about himself as a lesbian throughout the film. So I didn't know that he was living as a man until I found out that they was the first transgender nominee.
I understand your confusion. I let it go because it wasn't necessarily important.
It's not important, but it's
important.
Historically, it's important.
Right.
But
it's important for the nomination and the allowance for inclusion, but it's not important because of what the story it's telling.
Well, I think the important thing is that Yance lived as a woman when the brother was alive.
When the subject was alive.
So this is about the death of Yance's brother, and it's another one where the morality is very gray.
This one is a little bit only because it's so old and because there's no other evidence. It's not like today where we're having more cameras about, so it's a little bit easier to see where things might fall, or to at least make a better judgment on our own level. This is much more hearsay.
The film doesn't draw a compelling case for its stated purpose, but I think it's interesting watching a person come to terms more with what happened. And in that regard, if you're watching it to see justice, then you're not going to get that. But if you're watching it to see a person come to terms with something that happened in their past, then I feel like you'll get that. The thing about Netflix and some of their documentaries, it goes back to their most popular documentary for me, which is Making a Murderer. Everybody's convinced that Steve is innocent of the crime because the movie does such a great job of convincing you that he is. And yet, when you really look at the evidence that wasn't presented in the film, it's so obvious that he's the murderer. To me, at least. This man raped, tortured, murdered, desecrated, scattered.
All spoilers unless you've seen it.
A woman, and they made a 6-part documentary of trying to get him released from prison. And so Netflix is more about getting ratings, I think, which is a shame.
I don't know.
It's good that people are watching more documentaries now because of Netflix. You get some great things from them, like The 13th was a Netflix original, I believe. And but
it is a Netflix original. I don't know. I feel difficult. I feel bad about this because I think it could have also been. I'm allowing for Netflix to have widened their circle of people who buy, and based off the premise or watching part of the show without further digging, was like, "This is amazing. We're buying it. Thanks, bye," and then didn't, and just let it go.
Right. Well,
do you know what I mean? Like it's like somebody just didn't follow up on it. Rather
but they
than
were
I feel like
so
they are
convinced. I've talked to a lot of people that are so convinced by that documentary series. It's like propaganda, where they don't want to listen to the evidence that wasn't presented to them. They don't want to hear it because they bought into it so heavily. It's kind of like watching Fox News to get that part of your brain stroked, or NPR to get that part of your brain stroked. It's
sure.
It closes their minds to anything other than what the documentary is about. So Strong Island, I feel, doesn't do that. It doesn't make a good case. So I think it's watchable.
Strong Island does a good job.
Draw your own conclusion.
It opens up a conversation too. I think it doesn't close it like Traffic Stop does. I think this allows for people to have
Well,
an
there might
idea
be
of what's
people
going
that
on.
side with King in Traffic Stop, but
It's not about taking sides, it's just about opening the conversation and allowance for people to genuinely hear another person's ideas and thoughts, as opposed to being like, oh, that's you believe, I'm not listening to this.
so we heard what my favorite was, which was Icarus, and that was the Vegas favorite. What was your favorite of those documentaries?
Probably Icarus, just because he's so entertaining. How do you not want to watch him? He is the most entertaining one out of all of them. I liked Strong Island, but yeah, it was too gray for me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and it also didn't seem quite fleshed out. It was more about grief.
We have 9 Best Picture nominations this year to go through. So the first one is Call Me By Your Name. It's Luca Guadagnino, Peter Spears, and Marco Marabito. It's first nomination for all of them. This film was nominated for 4. In addition to Best Picture, it was Best Actor, Timothy Chalamet, Adapted Screenplay and Song. Michael Stolberg, who played Elio's father, was in 3 Best Picture nominated films. Also was in The Post and The Shape of Water. Let's just get into it. This was my least favorite of the nominated films.
You know what?
By
I think
a long shot.
It's growing on me. The more I'm able to. I think I was too tired when I was watching it because it was
tedious. It was tedious.
I connected it more to it than you did, obviously. It's difficult. Like I said, I think it's because I was tired. And reflecting back on it now, I do think it was very sweet.
Okay. Well, I went into it thinking that my biggest point of contention was going to be that it was a 17-year-old boy and a 40-year-old man. First of all,
that's not how it is in the book.
It's not how it is in the book. It's a 24-year-old and a 17-year-old, which is a 7-year difference, but it's much more understandable.
Yeah, you can't talk about that, can you?
Here's the other thing, is that Timothy Chalamet and Armie Hammer, yes, Lady Bird's boyfriend and the Lone Ranger, are basically, because Timothy Chalamet, if you didn't know, was also in Lady Bird, it's basically, they're basically only like 7 years difference in age as well. I think it's 24 and 29, actually. I think it's like 5 years age difference between the two of them.
Supposedly, but I don't think they ever announce his age.
In real life. I'm talking about in real life, the actors. But
oh, yeah, they're super close.
But Armie Hammer looks like he's in his mid to late 30s.
Timothy Chalamet hasn't aged.
And Timothy Chalamet looks like he's 15 years old.
He kind of stopped.
Yeah, he's got the body of a boy. And then there's...
And that's too.
And it's in the trailer. There's the scene where his father is talking about the statues and how they have a sort of ageless sensuality that draws you in, which in the movie, in the context of the movie, is actually, he's basically saying timeless. But in the trailer, it came across as like, oh, this is the gay Lolita story. And so I thought that was what I was going to have a problem with, is a boy-loving movie, which I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with a gay cinema. I thought Moonlight was a beautiful movie. I do have a problem with...
You're digging a hole. Stop.
Well, no, okay, here's the difference between... Here's where I'm going to give it some props. I didn't really care for Brokeback Mountain so much because I felt like it was a movie about...
Such a bad hole right now.
Well, no, I thought it was a movie about lust. I didn't believe that those actors, that those characters were in love. And then I also felt like it was directed by a straight man. It was acted by straight men who their next movies were Jarhead with Jared Leto, and he played Don Juan in his next movie, Heath Ledger. And it's hard to, because nobody wants to knock on Heath Ledger, and it was a good performance and everything, but I felt like it was like, Why Can't I Quit You was like, Why Can't I Stop Banging You was what I got out of that movie. And in this movie, I did feel like the two actors were in love. I felt like the characters were in love with one another. And
is it because you were allowed to see the two of them just be physically close as opposed to intimate in a sexual sense? Because in Brokeback Mountain, I guess I get what you were saying, whereas it focused a lot on sex.
Yeah, I didn't feel like. I mean, they do some kissing and stuff like that, but in this movie, it's a seduction that's happening without either of the characters wanting it. But it does
Well,
seem to come out
kinda.
of kind of nowhere. Um,
No, it doesn't because
it takes
well,
it takes a long time to develop.
one character definitely makes themselves plain, but you
Yeah,
don't.
but when they talk about it, it's like, well, they never like. How are they? How do they know what the other person's talking about it? And I didn't. I felt like that moment didn't work for me. But here's my problem.
But that's
with it.
how it is with young love. Like when you're a child and you first fall in love, you don't.
But Armie
you
Hammer's
don't know
not.
those.
He's not the kid.
But he also.
And he knew exactly what he was talking about. He's like, all right.
I know, and he says that in the movie.
Yeah.
He makes.
Are we talking about what I think we're talking about? Yes. Okay. And they were talking around it, so I didn't.
But he's also allowing him to be innocent and a child. So I mean, you have to realize he's allowing him to grow up, which is very mature.
Right. But let's get to my problem with the film because it wasn't any of those things.
Continue your whole.
My problem with the film was that there was no story. There was no story. The last two scenes are really great, and it's basically like the way they
build up.
Yeah, it's basically the way they summarize the whole story up until that point.
Sure.
There's no story. And it reminded me, and this is a terrible movie. It's probably one of the worst. This is a Razzie movie. But it reminded me of the trailer for 50 Shades Freed. Where for 3 minutes, it's like, we have the best house, and we're taking this wonderful vacation. I can't believe I'm married to you. And I'm like, okay, where's the story? And then they at least have a story in that trailer. Minute 3, it's like, oh, I also have this boyfriend that's stalking me. And it's that type of movie's like erotica, right? That's what I would classify Call Me by Your Name as for me. It's like erotica.
No, because I think
it's poetic and beautifully crafted erotica.
It's difficult because the self-discovery for Timothée Chalamet's character
is erotic.
Take longer than I'm sure most people are used to, but I also think that it really expounds upon what it's like to first fall in love and be so insecure about it, and then wanting to be enough.
Sure, yeah.
And then he's trying to identify it and trying to be there, but it's the difficulty in trying to get there. And
but there are even some there's a lot of genital rubbing and like the apricot scene and stuff like that.
You can't let that go, can you?
Well, it's in the movie.
It is, but
right
you
there.
have referenced
It's like American Pie.
You have referenced it every single day since we've seen that movie.
Do
you want an apricot? Should I get you a bunch of apricots for summer?
Aside from the condom scene in the square, it's the most awkward scene, and I understand. I get it. All right, it's something that happens.
Then why are you giving him shit?
But what I'm saying is that it's part of an erotic story. It doesn't build the story.
Okay, so I guess my problem lies in the fact that you're using.
There is no story.
There is a story. It's just a very personal story, and it's not everyone's story. But my problem comes the fact that you're using the word erotic, and I think the reason why I have a problem with it is because even though it is correct in most terms, it makes it sound so much more sexualized than it is it's in a negative light, I guess.
It's a pretty sexy movie.
It is, but I also think that
50 Shades Grey would be erotica.
But
it's not
I feel like using
erotica.
the word erotica shames it in some way because it's kind of got negative connotations.
Yeah,
to it.
and I don't mean the negative connotation. It's artistic erotica. It's very
still using
highbrow.
You're still using,
but
well, that's what they also thought of Deep Throat when it first came out. But using erotica,
not Deep Throat. You're thinking of Midnight Cowboy, and it won Best Picture as the first X-rated. Best Picture.
No, I was thinking of Deep Throat because it was shown in theaters. But my point is,
if they had the internet back then, it would have been on the internet.
Sure, well, it still is. But my point is that it's definitely something that is self-discovering, and it doesn't shy away from allowing a younger person who doesn't know enough about themselves to discover their sexuality, which is really relieving to me. I think that's wonderful to have age appropriateness for that. That you shouldn't be afraid of your body. We have so many people and so many times that we end up getting shamed about ourselves, that women are even shamed about their own bodies, that you have this that is allowing for him to self-discover who he is and what kind of person he likes, who he really is. I think that's wonderful.
Well, here's the thing about it. I think as far as romance movies go, I don't think it was the best movie of the nominated films for romance. I think that On Body and Soul was a better romance
Shape
because
of
it
Water
had a
was a better
story.
romance.
Shape of Water was a better romance. And I think it makes me happy, even though I'm such a fan of La La Land, it makes me happy that Moonlight won last year.
Really? Because you were talking mad shit.
Yeah,
You
no,
were salty.
well, because I don't think it was the best picture. But as far as its historical place, it is a much better picture than Call Me by Your Name or
It deals with different things. Now, I will say that as far as me defending it the whole time, because it has grown on me the more that I'm able to reflect on it. I will say that it was too idealistic. This kid who has a wonderful.
That's what I mean when I say it's erotica. Nothing bad happens.
But I think that's the difference. It's not to me. I'm
There's
allowing
no
for the sexual discovery, but it was just too idyllic. You have the wonderful parents that love and support him, that have these wonderful jobs that allow them to live in this really great mansion in Italy
Right.
with servants, and that he has these friends who are super understanding
50
and loving.
Shades Freed.
And then you have, with all these spoilers, sorry. And then you have the golden chance of a lifetime, where you find the Adonis that you think you love, and they love back.
It's kind of like people give them a thumbs up for their relationship throughout the movie.
Well,
it's everything that happens was set up to happen at the beginning. Nothing that happens in the whole film until the last two scenes it's all inevitable, right? You're watching a movie where two guys are going to hook up. It takes 2 hours for that to happen. And then you also know at the beginning that the summer's going to end, and that's the conflict. It's inevitable.
Sure, it's
inevitable.
It's kind of like the fantasy that you have. You have the fantasy that you're this young, really hot guy, and then you finally meet the slightly older hot guy that's also really smart and just knows more about the world, and you're a really intelligent being that you can woo with your talents and just all kinds of stuff. So I do think it's a fantasy version. It's almost like a fanfic version of different stories that you write about, or not you write about, but people write about. So I understand that. I do give that its credence that, yeah, it's too fanatical for me. Like, I want somebody to have a fault. Yes. Other than the fact...
That's basically it. It needs to have a story. It had no story.
See, but having a fault and having a story are two different things. The story is he falls in love during summer and has a great fling.
It's funny because when the writer won his Oscar, he said, it's just great to tell this story. And all I could think... And it was great that he won. It's wonderful, and I love that he thanked his two partners in life, who I think one was a woman and one was a man, which is the perfect...
Regardless, they were also passed away.
Yeah, they had both passed away, and... But I didn't understand what he meant when he said, I got to tell the story. I didn't.
The story
what
of
story did he want to tell?
Finding young love and living through it for your whole
but
summer,
there are better
and
stories
knowing that you have found something like that. Because, I mean, people can't even find love in general, let alone idyllic love.
Those are our thoughts on we have a few thoughts on Call Me By Your Name. I really thought Call Me By Your Name, by the way, would mean like, because there was no gay marriage at the time. Well, no, I thought it would be like, because there's no gay marriage at the time, you can't take my last name. Call me by your name. But it was just something kind of silly that they say that becomes meaningful later on. But
isn't it... okay, so, and there is a thing that passes on the wall for 1981. I don't know what the time frame is of this.
It looked like it took place in the 90s, but they play a lot of 80s music in it. So late 80s, early 90s.
It looked, because they had a calendar. It looked like it could have been a 1981 calendar, but it could have just been artwork.
So it's sort of forbidden love, but it's never really the point.
It's not forbidden.
It's during the AIDS epidemic, but it's never the point. And
they don't bring up the AIDS epidemic either, but it's also in Italy.
Right. I think that those are interesting. They would have made the story interesting. I don't think that they were necessary. They just needed a story. So you don't need to seize on the generic things. But I would like to see, honestly, we have had 3 huge queer cinema films that do not, and now with Fantastic Woman, 4 kind of culturally shifting films, and yet there isn't one about lesbians. And I understand why they haven't, because honestly, as a man, it's difficult for me to sit through some of those love scenes, right? But watching 2 women, it would be really easy, right? And so, and the point isn't that it's difficult, because it's you having the separation of things that are normal to you to watch for pleasure, as opposed to watching it for the story, and to watching these 2 people actually evolve, as opposed to these 2 people having a pseudo story of delivering pizza. Right. We'll talk just because it's part of the cultural landscape. There were 2 fantastic shows that are both canceled now. You have Take My Wife, which is Cameron Esposito and Rhea Butcher, who are a married lesbian couple that work together in comedy, and they were doing a show that was just incidentally that they were lesbians. That it was about the two women. They're both wives, so Take My Wife, please, haha, comedy, and it was great. And the stories were not lesbian centric; they just happened to be lesbians, but it did impact the stories in ways. And then you have One Mississippi, which was Tig Navarro, and that was a really brilliant series. Went 2 seasons. It was all about things that happened in her actual life, with her double mastectomy, with her mother's illness, with living at home, and then having to deal with the producer of her show with the Time's Up movement and the Me Too. The producer of her show was Louis C.K., and the second season dealt with that in a huge way, and it got canceled. Both of those shows got canceled, and those were the only 2 lesbian-centric shows, and they were brilliant. And so that's what I would like to see next. I do think it's great that Moonlight won last year, although I was rooting for La La Land, in full disclosure.
Salty.
Let's move on. We've got Darkest Hour, which is Tim Bevan, 5 nominations. Anthony McCartan, 2 nominations. Eric Fellner, 6 nominations. Lisa Bruce with 2 nominations, and Douglas Urbanski with 2 nominations. Or first nomination. This picture was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including makeup and hairstyling, Best Actor, which it won, cinematography, costume, and production design. I really enjoyed this movie after I finished it, because this was the one I saw all of the best pictures in the theater, and you saw all of them, but this one, I rented it on Redbox so you could watch it before and after your class. Yeah. And I went to the theater and watched it, and I texted you afterwards. What a great film!
My only qualm, because it was somewhat personally self-inflicted, is that I had to watch it in 3 segments, and one of them was after a night's sleep. So I couldn't get the full breadth of the movie and the performance, just because I especially having to watch the last 40 minutes of it the next day after a full day of work on top of that, I had to really think about where they were, what was going on. I need to reconnect, and it was unfortunate. I should have probably just watched it all on the Friday before the Oscars, but it is what it is.
Well, it's it's about Winston Churchill during the Dunkirk, which is that whole situation, which is why Dunkirk and Darkest Hour are a great double feature. It's the first 30 days that he's prime minister. 30 days. Okay. And that's what they say in the documentary, at least, the behind the scenes. But he tells 3 of the greatest speeches within a 4-week period, and the 3 greatest speeches are sort of the structure of the film in a way. And it's great because another movie, if you wanted to tie it in, would be The King's Speech, which is about a speech, and it's the same king that he's dealing with in this situation. Different actor, of course.
I was going to say, it would cross over, too.
But it's great. Gary Oldman is fantastic. Just this man that's so cocksure, and then what happens to you when you're facing the darkest hour of your nation.
The stress of being who you are, because he has definitely the public persona, and then when he's by himself, or even with his wife on some occasion, there you have,
or when he's talking to Roosevelt on the phone.
Sure. Well, even then, he was still putting up the bravado. I feel like you could see the struggle. You see the weight is actually there, whereas when he's out in public and he's doing anything else, it's like, I've got this.
It's I loved it. I loved the way it was filmed. It reminded me of when you're reading a great comic book, and the way that they panel it out is creative, and you're like, oh man, this is what you can do with a comic book. It doesn't just have to be a bunch of square panels
with the word bubble in the same place.
Yeah. Right. This is what they did cinematically with it, with the little boy looking through his fingers, and then the next shot is the fingers closing around the plane and things like that. It's just fantastic. The elevator shot, it's just really well put together and a great story, and it ties in with Dunkirk, which is Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas. Nolan was also nominated for Best Director. Thomas has 2 nominations. This film was nominated for 8 director, film editing, score, sound editing, sound mixing, cinematography, production design. It won at least the sound editing and mixing and score, I believe, as well, didn't it?
Yes, it won.
And editing, film editing.
It swept all the technicals, basically.
I
remember that. I mean, we could pull it up, but whatever.
And Dunkirk's great. If you haven't seen it, Christopher Nolan's main character, again, we mentioned this in an early episode, is time. And in fact, most of his characters are indistinguishable from one another.
Well, it also ties into kind of into Darkest Hours, where time is such a constraint, and they talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I only have this much time. It's not a driving force, but they mention it frequently enough that if you were to watch Darkest Hour and then you watch Dunkirk, it does become doubly more emphasized because you were able to have that overlay.
Yeah, it was another great movie. I mean, it seemed like it was going to be Christopher Nolan's year because this movie came out early in the year, and
everyone forgot about Get Out.
Well, no, I think it came out before Get Out.
Get Out was in like February, bro.
Well, it was. It definitely felt like Christopher Nolan was going to probably win Best Director, and he didn't. He didn't, but he's well, not thankfully, but
no, it's not that he did bad.
It's a great category.
It wasn't bad. It was just tough competition, and I do think
Del Toro was due as well. It was his moment as well, and it's
Peele was worth it too.
Jordan Peele, but he didn't win.
No, but
and he had Paul Thomas Anderson, who's they were masters. All of the people that were in that category were masters.
Anyway,
even with Jordan being so early in his career, and yeah, so he just had great competition, and it's not a worry because Christopher Nolan will come out with another brilliant film, and he makes commercially appealing brilliant films too. So Dunkirk was great. It wasn't as commercial as his other films, but
it's because there's a humming like an air conditioner on all the time.
not that. I mean, it just wasn't exciting like Inception. There were no characters except for Kenneth Branagh and Tom Hardy, and then a bunch of brunettes running around the beach.
Which I'm not going to lie, I kind of appreciate. But they also couldn't put a bunch of blondes out there because then it looks like the German army. I
got his characters confused. You've got the one character that could have been a German, could have been a Frenchman. You don't know. And I didn't know what happened to him because I was confused.
Doesn't he get shot?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I can't tell. And spoilers anyway. But so, okay.
Well, who are we talking about anyway, since they all look the same?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It was intentional.
Then it's not a spoiler.
But it didn't bother me, actually, which is kind of weird because...
Anyway, continue.
Okay, so Get Out, which is Jordan Peele, who was also nominated for Best Director and Original Screenplay. He was... I think they said he was the first person to be nominated for those three things for a debut film in 50 years or something like that.
Yeah. He's not the first ever, but definitely the first in a very long while.
And then Jason Blum, 2 nominations. Sean McKittrick, first nomination, and Edward H. Ham Jr., first nomination. What's crazy about this is that these are all essentially people that have worked in genre films before. 4 nominations for this for Best Actor, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. And Get Out is just... It won Best Original Screenplay. It's a perfect screenplay.
I do want to say, too, that it's crazy to hear that they had done everything per diem.
Yeah, they didn't make any money off this movie.
But my point is that nobody got paid making the movie. They just made the movie because they believed in the movie.
Yeah, it was something that Jordan Peele really wanted to make.
Like a passion project finally is getting its credence.
Didn't think anyone else would want to make it, and it's just a great movie, and it's culturally
significant.
A time bomb. It just really...
It's definitely something that you can come back to in 50 years and be like, that was that era.
I think in the future it'll be like the Pulp Fiction of this year, where everybody says, well, how did Pulp Fiction not win Best Picture? I think that might be for Get Out.
Could be. I mean, I can still see people saying that about 3 Billboards.
I don't know. I don't know that that's going to hold up as much over time.
Okay.
But we'll get to that one in a minute. But yeah, it's just... there's a lot that you can say about Get Out. Just a fantastic movie.
Get Out was a wonderful movie.
We bought the poster immediately after seeing it.
Did we?
Pretty much, yeah.
I don't know how I even got that poster. I just know that we went in somewhere and they had it, and I was like, that one's mine.
Yeah, she bought that in Kong Skull Island, and I told her to keep the other one rolled up.
I'm going to put it up.
And
I'm
Get
gonna
Out
put it up
is sitting
eventually.
right underneath my La La Land poster, and you know how much I love La La Land. So, Lady Bird, Scott Rudin, he's had 9 nominations. Eli Bush, first nomination, and Evelyn O'Neill, first nomination. 6 nominations, including actress, best supporting actress, which it won, best directing, and best original screenplay. The only nominated best picture that was directed by a woman, which is interesting.
Greta Gerwig.
And it's just, if you don't like Saoirse Ronan, then there's something wrong with you.
Saoirse.
Yeah, she's
We
phenomenal.
actually had to watch a couple different clips just to figure out how to say her name.
That's right.
Saoirse. And then Colbert's was the best because he had a bunch of different names out there, asking her how to say all these names, and they all had different vowels that are just ridiculous.
Yeah, it was almost like looking at Russian names.
No, not that bad. Russian names have a bunch of like X's and R's and N's and random ass places.
But it's a great movie. It's another coming of age story. I think it told that story in a way that everybody can relate to. That's the dog snoring. If you can hear him, he's awake and he's snoring.
He can't breathe.
Yeah, Lady Bird is fantastic. It's the highest reviewed film of the year. It did not win. I'm sorry, it did not win Best Supporting Actress. I, Tonya won.
Tonya won. Yeah.
Laurie Metcalf
Allison Janney
did not win, but she was great, and we talked about that one in an earlier episode. So check out that actor episode.
Blah, 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 blah.
Phantom Thread, Paul Thomas Anderson. It's also
really
nominated for Best
Lady
Director.
Bird, or
Did you want to talk more about it? You didn't seem to.
I mean, you kept talking the whole way through, and then just kept right on going.
Okay, I'm a man, and you're a woman, and that's how we communicate.
Uh-huh.
Time's up.
Uh-huh.
What else did you want to say about Lady Bird? Okay, so Phantom Thread, Paul Thomas Anderson, also nominated for Best Director. Megan Allison, 4 nominations. Joanne Seller, 2 nominations. And Daniel Lupi, 2 nominations. This was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Actor, Supporting Actress, Director, Score, and Costume. Costume was the one that it nabbed this year. Daniel Day-Lewis is fantastic in this. The story is very artsy. You either get it or you don't. It's really about the pain of love and the maddening nature of a person who's a genius sometimes, and wanting that person for yourself. And the work that goes into creating something beautiful, and the pain that goes into creating something beautiful. What else do you have to? What would you like to say about Phantom Thread, Stella?
I watched the whole movie only to be dismayed and confounded by the end of it.
Yeah, it's not really a commercial film.
And it's not even in that sense.
It's very like European.
Sure, I guess. I can't connect to the characters' relationship. I cannot identify with how their dynamics work because it is so ridiculous.
So much like our own relationship.
No. No. Do you want me to start doing that? I'll go start picking mushrooms right now.
Okay, so The Post. Steven Spielberg, of course, 17 nominations, 2 wins, and an Irving Thalberg Memorial Award. Amy Pascal, longtime collaborator, first nomination. Not longtime collaborator, actually. His longtime collaborator is Kathleen Kennedy, and she's moved on to Disney. So, first nomination. She also produced Molly's Game, which was nominated for Best Picture, but she was not an executive producer, so she wasn't nominated for that. And then McCosco Krieger, 2 nominations. This was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, including Best Actress, Meryl Streep. She did not win. The Post. I didn't think I'd like it as much as I did. It's funny that people make so many jokes about how boring it is, and I didn't think it was boring at all.
I didn't think it was boring, but I do think it's the weakest out of all of the contenders because it didn't tell the...
Call me by your name.
Nope. Didn't tell the story strong enough. Even though it had a story, it didn't have the love behind it. Rather than Call Me By Your Name, may have had a weaker story, but it had a bunch of love and passion behind it.
Well, I think it's interesting. It has both Bob and David, Bob Odenkirk and David Cross in it, which is kind of cool. It's great that you could figure out what Steven Spielberg's a fan of by who he casts, and it's interesting to watch. What for me the big spectacle going into it was that it was Steven Spielberg, Tom
Meryl
Hanks,
Streep.
and Meryl Streep. And you get to see how Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep are very different actors. Meryl Streep internalizes everything, and Tom Hanks kind of externalizes,
which is actually very
most of his performance.
predictive of gender to me.
In some ways, but I think when Tom Hanks internalizes, that was when he won his Oscars.
It's per them. Meryl Streep is very internal anyway. A lot of her performances come through the subtlety of everything, which is why she's called the chameleon, because it's all surface tension. It's not what she's doing.
I think that the key, though, is that it's a movie about something important that you should know about, and it tells it in a way that's very energetic, but it's not...
Did it better than Waco?
It's kind of, well, yeah. Waco was pretty good for the first 2 episodes, and that's a different thing, but... But it's kind of like eating your vegetables with cheese on top. But you don't. That's not your favorite part of the meal necessarily. You like cheesy.
I was gonna say it depends
broccoli,
on how much you like cheesy broccoli.
but you may not go up for seconds. I probably won't watch it again. I don't usually watch movies more than once, but I probably won't watch it again.
Or even better, it's just not a movie that you would want to put in your library to have the availability for it.
Sure.
If it's on HBO and you happen to be flipping through the channel and you have that channel, you're probably going to stop, watch it for a few minutes, and then move on. You're not going to be like, oh, hey, look, and then continue.
Then we have the winner for Best Picture, The Shape of Water. Guillermo del Toro was also nominated for Director. And then J. Miles Dale, first nomination. This was nominated for 13 Academy Awards, including Director, which it won, Actress, which it lost, Supporting Actress, Supporting Actor, Score, which it won, Original Screenplay, Cinematography, Costume, sound editing, sound mixing, film editing, and production design. I think it won production design, did it not? But anyway, it's sort of a fantastic love story. It's as Del Toro described it, it's a genre film talking about real issues in today's world, and doing it in a way that genre films naturally do it in a way that isn't super preachy.
Or making all of the themes obvious.
Right.
Some of it is obvious because you see the love story happening between this woman and fish.
Sure. Like The Bride of Frankenstein is most likely about Wales's homosexuality, and it's not obvious at all.
Whales, like
the director.
Oh.
And it's,
I mean, dolphins do it.
It's at the time. It was a relationship that people were calling an abomination, and so you made this film about that. But for 60 years, no one had a clue that was probably most likely what it was about.
Or they didn't necessarily delve deep enough into it. If
Right.
you had an idea about it and then you watch that movie, you would instantly get it.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It's finally, those types of movies are finally getting recognized, at least now,
and being watched.
Sure.
And being watched.
But they've usually been popular. This was, Frankenstein, all those types of movies have been popular throughout. But to get critical hailing.
So Frankenstein and Shape of Water, name another one.
Well, my favorite is is Shock Corridor.
I've never heard of it.
It's a Sam Fuller movie. I know, that's the thing, is that it
You're
came
talking
and
about
went.
it saying that it's popular, but I've never heard of Shock
Well,
Corridor.
it was from 1960.
Frankenstein was from when?
And it's about civil rights, but it's really about a guy who wants to solve a mystery. So he goes into, he's a journalist, and he checks himself into a psychiatric hospital, and everybody's worried he's going to go mad. But it's a movie about civil rights and gender equality and things like that. And it's Sam Fuller, who, of course, is one of the people that filmed the concentration camps, the liberation, and that moment changed the way that he saw the world, and he made films about purposes, but he made genre films. He made, and those directors generally don't get the respect, the credit that they deserve. And now, finally, Guillermo del Toro is victorious with a movie that never would have gotten a second glance 10 years ago.
Yes, and
by
I
the
think that has to
Academy.
do with him being Del Toro. If you had a different artist trying to do the same thing, it probably wouldn't have made it. I think Del Toro, in his own right, and deservedly, brings a lot of weight to his class. So when he finds a script or finds a story that he really likes, he invests into it, and he's able to bring the audience that it needs.
Yes, but you're taking for granted the fact that it's Del Toro. He's only had one previous nomination.
He's also had several other movies that are good.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
The weakest probably being Pacific Rim, and that still was commercially great.
Yeah, but I'm saying that you're saying that like he's this well-known auteur, filmmaker that's well-respected, and he is well-known. Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, he's in that caliber.
Yeah.
But Robert Rodriguez didn't get nominated for Best Picture for El Mariachi.
No, but my point is that he's breaking that ground.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
He's bringing it around.
So I think it's fantastic that those movies are being given the credit that they deserve, and that Get Out is another film just like that, where it's a genre film that talks about things that anybody that's a fan of Twilight Zone or Black Mirror or Star Trek or these types of morality tales that are told in genre, this is fantasy. You got Lord of the Rings and things like that all talk about things that were relevant when Tolkien wrote them. Less relevant today.
Kind of. I mean, they're still kind of timeless because you can still find ways to connect it to today.
Yeah, I mean, it's about people that search for immortality and
acceptance and trying to find unity despite your differences.
It's more religious themed than anyway. So, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is Martin McDonagh, also nominated for Best Original Screenplay. Graham Broadbent, first nomination, and Peter Zernin, first nomination. This was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Actress, which it won, Best Supporting Actor twice. It won one of those. Score, Original Screenplay, and Film Editing. And Stella, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Everything had to do with the performance between all of the actors, and it was so beautifully done that that's a movie I would watch again, and it would be a movie that I would love to watch right around the beginning of the year every year, just to kind of feel empowered, kind of feel like you're on a mission.
It's interesting because it felt like a play to me in a lot of parts, and we talked about that
segments
before.
For it, sure.
It's like at this backdrop when she's in her front yard, the billboards are there, even though when they talk about them, it's on a road that nobody takes and it's way out of the way.
Yeah.
And
they're ever present, basically. Like, you're always aware of the billboards being around, even if they're off screen and they're down the road outside the town. It's
visually interesting though, and it's got a lot of great performances. Yes, I think the story is interesting and it's non-traditional. There have been Best Pictures in the past that disappointed me when they told stories similar to this one.
Call Me by Your Name.
No, not Call Me by Your Name. I'm thinking No Country for Old Men. Yet I didn't feel dissatisfied. I'd like to see what happens after the movie stops. But I was still satisfied by the ending.
Yes, and it's kind of like a Stephen King book, but it does give you closure. In the sense that if you're reading a Stephen King book, from my experience is that if I'm reading a Stephen King book, I'm going to read it, and then he goes off into this like cliffhanger, and you're like, but what's the next 5 minutes? You're not giving me the next 5 minutes, and I need the next 5 minutes to feel complete about this fucking story. Whereas with Ebbing, Missouri, I'm okay with where they left off, but if there was a short that explained what happened words, or even
it
would, but in some sense, but even a short dialogue of where.
No, I didn't want any of that.
I would be okay with
it's not a true story. It's not like they go, and Martin Luther King Jr. was shot on a balcony the next day. It doesn't conclude because the story allows you to create your own ending. But anyway, it's all about the performances. If you want to watch these actors chew up the scenery, it's not a subtle film. It's very, Woody Harrelson's fairly subtle in it, But for the
He's
most
also
part,
short. But I think, okay, let me clarify. When I say I want a snippet of what happens afterwards, I want the next 10 minutes. I want to know their struggle in the next 10 minutes. I don't need to know exactly what they're doing. I don't
but
need
the
to know
last
where they're
scene
going to
is
end
the
up
last
being.
scene, and it's there
Sure,
for a reason.
I get that's what they're trying to tell. I know that this is the story and that's where it ends. I respect that as a filmmaker and an artist and their decision to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean I wouldn't want to see the end of a character's struggle. I want to see him have, or her, it's not a spoiler, I want to see this person have the final clarity. Whereas when you have a discovery of a problem and you're going on an arc and you realize that you may be wrong about something and you're trying to figure out who you are as a person, the ultimate reward that I love is having the clarity and the understanding of who you are. Whether that means you're a good person or a bad person, morally or ethically, it doesn't matter. It's just having the understanding that you know who you are. And seeing the two final characters at the end of the story, one of them being farther along their journey than the other, which is why a lot of the controversy was for the movie. I kind of want to have that fulfillment of them knowing where they're going and them discovering who they are as a person, as opposed to who they were led to believe they were.
I gotcha. So, what was your favorite of the best pictures? Obviously, The Shape of Water won. It was the Vegas odds favorite. What was your favorite?
Well, actually, Ebbing, Missouri beat it out at the very last end. On Saturday,
well, that's
it was
just because it was kind of
through.
tainted by a possible lawsuit regarding plagiarism. Or
I think that got dropped.
Did it? Then why? I don't know why it got.
Not by
Spirit
the
Awards,
people.
maybe?
I think it was just like, no, this isn't.
Probably
working.
the Spirit Awards.
Anyway, and it could have been the Spirit Awards, but it's such a hard toss up for me because I love The Shape of Water and Ebbing, Missouri. I don't know if I could choose between the two of them. I like Ebbing, Missouri because the performances were so powerful, and it's definitely something that I would highlight in being like, okay, this actor did these things, and this is why I think this person is amazing, and it can like encapsulate why this actor is amazing. And then, are you? Stop making faces at me. And then you have The Shape of Water, which has a whole world that I can visit and fall into and love.
I got you. My favorite, I think it should have been Get Out.
You're such a hater.
It's my favorite movie
Such
of the year.
a hater.
We'll be talking about our top 10 favorite movies of the year in the final episode. Our next episode will be about the broadcast, our thoughts on the broadcast, best moments, and all of that, right?
No.
So tune in next